They said she'd crash and burn. That was my father's prediction, cold, precise, delivered like a verdict. 2 days later, the flight deck shook as the jet screamed overhead and the loudspeaker cut through the wind. Major Singh cleared for carrier qualification. People turned. Helmets paused mid-motion. I looked up at the observation platform just as my father blinked, stunned, his certainty fracturing without a word. In that moment, with steel under my boots and the ocean breathing below, I realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. The hardest landing I would ever make wasn't on a moving deck, it was inside my own family. Part 1, the hardest landing was home. The deck trembled under my boots as the jet roared past, a steel blur slicing Pacific air into ribbons. Heat shimmered off the gray surface, and the carrier breathed like a living thing, metal, wind, and intent. My call sign crackled through the comms, steady and impersonal. Major Singh cleared for final approach. The knot behind my ribs tightened. Not fear, focus. I'd flown this profile in simulators until the motions lived in my bones. I'd done it in drills at night in crosswinds that made other pilots wave off. But this was different. This wasn't just a landing, this was a reckoning. 24 hours earlier, I'd arrived by chopper to the USS Antares, America's newest carrier. No banners, no press, just a nod from command and a quiet word that this demonstration mattered. The Falcon X wasn't just another aircraft. It was the future, and one pilot had been cleared to make its first public carrier qualification. Me. No one announced it. The whisper was enough. The Secretary of Defense would be watching via drone feed. Engineers were stacked 3 deep in the ready room, and someone somewhere decided it would be poetic to invite my father. I didn't care about the cameras, I cared about him. He wasn't supposed to be there. Retired admirals didn't haunt flight decks unless they were looking for ghosts. But someone at the Pentagon thought it made sense. Bring the legend. Let him watch the future. A few smiles flickered in the briefing room when they realized his daughter would be the one flying it. Nobody told him until the night before. We crossed paths by accident in the corridor, white lights, gray bulkheads, the smell of oil and coffee. He stopped, looked me up and down the way he used to look at new officers fresh out of Annapolis. Not with pride, with assessment. "They picked you," he said flatly. "That's reckless." I didn't flinch. I had learned not to. "You raised me," I replied. "If I crash, that's on you." He walked away, didn't look back. Now, standing on the deck beneath a 1,000-watt sky, I felt the carrier surge beneath me, waves slapping steel far below. A junior crewman approached, nervous energy leaking through his posture. "Ma'am, fuel check complete. Tower cleared." "You're good." I nodded. No smile. My hands moved without hesitation, helmet secured, gloves adjusted. This wasn't nerves. This was training, drilled, earned. As I climbed the ladder into the cockpit, I caught sight of the observation platform, a row of dark uniforms, reflective sunglasses. Somewhere up there, my father stood with his arms folded, watching like a jury. I'd grown up in the shadow of his medals. Now he stood in mine. When I was 5, he used to kneel beside me on the living room floor, explaining what flaps did while I pushed toy planes across the carpet. He once told me, "The sky's a war zone. You don't play in it, you dominate it." Until I said I wanted to fly. Then suddenly the sky wasn't a war zone anymore. It was a boy club and I wasn't invited. I lowered my visor and switched to comms. "Falcon X, this is Tower. Wind steady. You are clear to launch." "Roger, Tower," I replied, voice crisp. Then softly, so only I could hear, "Let him watch." The catapult fired. Power surged. The deck fell away. My spine pressed into the seat as the horizon dropped and the sky opened like a theater curtain. For a heartbeat, everything went quiet inside my helmet. Then the work began. The first maneuver, tight loop over the bow, clean. The second, rapid roll, precise. The Falcon X responded like it knew me, like it trusted my hands. Observers scanned, measured, waited for something to go wrong. I heard one voice in my head above all others. "You don't have the instinct." That's what he used to say. I did. I just didn't have his approval. Final descent, velocity steady, wheels down, hook armed. The deck came into view like a strip in a dream, narrow, alive, unforgiving. I leveled, slowed, centered. Falcon X approaching arrestor cables, I called. 3, 2. The hook caught clean. The jet slowed on command. No bounce, no jolt, just silence and then applause from the deck crew, sharp and surprised. A voice boomed over the loudspeaker, one I didn't recognize. First Falcon X carrier qualification record precision. Major Singh. I exhaled. Not from strain, from relief. For once I hadn't proven them wrong. I'd simply proven me right. I climbed down with my helmet tucked under my arm. My boots touched steel. I looked up. He wasn't clapping, he wasn't smiling, he was just staring. That was enough for now. I wasn't born into an ordinary family. I was born in base housing in Norfolk, Virginia. My lullabies were jet engines. My first memories were starched uniforms and briefing rooms. My father wasn't just a naval officer, he was the architect behind long-range air strategy in the late 2000s. When he spoke, commanders listened. When he entered a room, people stood. Even my teachers called him sir. At home, he was the wind and the law. I was 10 when I first said I wanted to fly. He'd just returned from a Pacific deployment, still in his whites. I sat cross-legged on the floor, gluing together a plastic Hornet model, one wing crooked. Someday, I said without looking up, I'll fly the real one. There was a pause. Then a chuckle, short, dismissive. You're smart, he said. Flying isn't your path. Why not? He crouched, lowered his voice. It's not built for you. Something inside me curled tight and quiet. It stayed that way for years. At 17, I had the grades, the athletic record, the recommendations. I sent my application to the academy without asking. When the acceptance came, I thought just maybe he'd smile. He poured a scotch and stared at the wall. You'll waste your potential, he muttered. You could have designed aircraft. Instead, you want to play soldier in the sky. That was the first time I left the table before the plates were cleared. Standing on the deck now, applause fading into routine, I realized this landing wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a much harder approach, one that had nothing to do with wind or wire, and everything to do with blood and silence. I adjusted my grip on the helmet and squared my shoulders. The sea doesn't care about lineage, it only respects the landing. So would I. I didn't remember learning to sleep through jet noise. It was just there, constant, familiar, like breathing. Base housing in Norfolk had a rhythm, reveille mornings, the hiss of steam irons on pressed uniforms, the low thunder of engines warming before dawn. Other kids had lullabies. I had afterburners. The walls rattled, the windows hummed, and nobody complained because that sound meant purpose. It meant people were doing their jobs. My father was already a presence before he was a person. His shadow reached rooms before he did. When he entered, a space conversation adjusted itself. Chairs straightened, voices softened. Even at home, the rules felt written in invisible ink. Don't interrupt, don't fidget, don't ask questions that weren't already answered. When I was little, he could be gentle in narrow windows of time. Sunday afternoons, usually. He'd sit cross-legged on the living room floor with me, his back against the couch, a mug cooling in his hand, while I pushed plastic planes across the carpet. He explained flaps and lift with patience, then tracing arcs in the air, letting me make mistakes. I loved those hours because they felt like permission. I was 10 when I said it out loud. He'd just come back from a Pacific deployment, white still crisp, shoes polished. He stood over me as I worked on a model Hornet, one wing glued crooked. I was concentrating so hard my tongue pressed against my teeth. Someday, I said without looking up, I'm going to fly the real one. The room went quiet. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that makes your shoulders inch up before you realize it. Then he laughed, short, contained, like he'd heard a clever joke. You're smart, he said, but flying isn't your path. I looked up, confused more than hurt. Why not? He crouched beside me, voice lowered, like this was a secret meant to protect me. Because it's not built for you. Carrier aviation takes instinct, aggression. You don't have to prove anything by chasing it. I nodded because nodding was safer than arguing, but something inside me folded in on itself and stayed there, quiet, tight. My mother didn't interrupt. She never did. She stood in the doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder, eyes warm, reading the room the way she always had. Later, when he'd gone to his study, she sat beside me and adjusted the crooked wing. "It doesn't have to be perfect to fly," she said. Then she kissed the top of my head and went back to the kitchen. At school, teachers spoke to me carefully once they learned my last name. Some smiled too wide, others overcorrected. Singh's daughter, they'd say, like it was a credential I could use if I wanted. I learned early how to be small in public and precise in private. By 17, my report card looked like a contract. Advanced placement, everything. Varsity track. Letters of recommendation that spoke about discipline and focus and calm under pressure. I filled out my application to the academy at night, door closed, desk lamp low. I didn't ask. I mailed it and went to sleep. The acceptance letter came on a Wednesday. Thick envelope, heavy seal. I held it for a long time before opening it, the way you hold something fragile when you don't know yet if it will break. I imagined handing it to him. I imagined the nod, the smile that never came easily. He didn't read it when I gave it to him. He poured a scotch, sat down, stared at the wall. "You'll waste your potential," he said finally. "You could have gone anywhere. Stanford, MIT. You could design aircraft instead of risking your life in one. You want to play soldier in the sky." "I don't want to play," I said. "I want to fly." He waved a hand, dismissing the difference. "You don't understand what you're choosing." I stood up before the plates were cleared. That was new. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I just left. My mother didn't follow. She never chased storms. At Annapolis, the air smelled like stone and river water and ambition. The days were long and exacting. The rules were clear. I thrived in that clarity. Aeronautical engineering clicked for me the way music clicks for other people. Math was honest. Physics didn't care who my father was. When I applied for the flight pipeline, my advisor leaned back in his chair and studied me for a moment. "You're a natural," he said. "But understand this, your name will work against you before it works for you." I wrote my father a letter by hand, told him I'd been selected for flight training at Pensacola. I chose my words carefully. I told him I was ready. I told him I would work harder than anyone. I told him I hoped one day he'd see why this mattered to me. His reply came as a single email, no greeting, no signature. "Stop embarrassing the Singh name." On my first day of flight school, I wore my uniform like armor. The hangar was loud and bright, the air thick with fuel and nerves. Most of my classmates were men, tall, confident, loud in the way people get when they're afraid to be quiet. The instructor, a grizzled pilot with salt and pepper hair, scanned the line. When he reached me, he paused. "You'd better be sharp," he said. "This isn't Top Gun with subtitles." Some of the guys laughed. I didn't. I met his eyes. "Yes, sir." Training was brutal. G-forces crushed my ribs. Instruments blurred after hour 6. I threw up more than once after landing, wiped my mouth, and went back to the debrief. My hands blistered from the throttle. My neck ached. I didn't call home to complain. I called my mother sometimes late when the lights were out. "Are you eating?" she'd ask. Enough, I'd say, which was almost true. One night a small package arrived. No note. Inside was a thin silver compass on a chain. I wore it under my flight suit from then on. When the world spun too fast, I'd touch it. North, south, home. By the second month, my numbers spoke for me. Recovery maneuvers, emergency protocols, night landings, clean, precise. Still. Compliments were rare. Raised eyebrows weren't. After a flawless night drill, one instructor pulled me aside. "You have talent," he said, "but you'll have to be better than good to be taken seriously, especially with that last name." I knew what he meant. Not Singh, Admiral Singh. I wasn't trying to be him. I was trying to be seen. By the time I earned my wings, exhaustion felt like a language I spoke fluently. It lived in my shoulders, my wrists, the quiet ache behind my eyes that never quite went away. Graduation day was bright and ceremonial, the kind of day people took photos for. I smiled when required. I shook hands. I folded the paper and put it away. Pride came later alone when no one was watching. Carrier qualification orders arrived in a plain manila folder. No fanfare. Out of 48 trainees, 8 were selected. One woman, me. Someone had scribbled a call sign in the corner in faded ink. Echo. I didn't know then how much that name would matter, or how often it would follow me into places where sound disappeared and decisions had to be made anyway. The first time I stepped onto a carrier in full gear, awe hit before fear. The deck was a moving city steel noise choreography. Jets screamed past with inches to spare. Crew moved with practiced urgency, hands signaling, bodies pivoting like they'd rehearsed for years. And then there was the weight. The knowledge that every mistake echoed louder out here. That the ocean didn't forgive. VFA 192, the Golden Dragons didn't welcome me. They didn't have to. Tradition did that work for them. When I reported to the ready room, a few heads turned, an eyebrow lifted. That was it. No applause, no handshake, just indifference wrapped in legacy. Carrier landings weren't like the simulators. Everything was faster, louder, sharper. The margin for error felt thin enough to cut skin. On my first attempt, a crosswind shoved me sideways, and I waved off, heart thudding against my ribs. The second try wasn't much better. That night I skipped the mess and sat alone in the maintenance bay replaying HUD footage until my eyes burned. A pilot with the call sign Slingshot walked past, coffee in hand. He stopped, leaned against a tool chest, and watched the screen with me. Even the best miss the wire on day one, he said, not unkindly. You'll get it, or you won't. Then he left. No pep talk, no sympathy, just truth. I got it on the third try. It wasn't pretty, it was safe. The next 10 were better, cleaner, centered, consistent. Still, no one said much. Silence can be a test. I learned to pass it. I listened more than I talked. I watched how pilots flinched on final approach, how nerves showed up in micro-adjustments. I offered tips quietly, never in front of others. Respect came slowly, the way trust does when it isn't demanded. At night, I followed my father's career from a distance. He was lecturing now, writing guest panels on defense theory. His words carried weight. His name still opened doors. He published an article on emergent threat dynamics in naval airspace. I read it twice. He never mentioned me, not once. Then came the day everything tilted. We were flying a 4-jet pattern over the South China Sea when one of our pilots lost electrical stability mid-air. I was fourth in the stack. I saw the engine flame out, watched his wing dip violently. There wasn't time to think. I slid under him, matched speed, relayed comms, talked him through it. My voice stayed level, my hands stayed steady. We brought him back. On deck, the chief said I'd saved a $70 million aircraft and a life. No ceremony, no medal, just a nod. That night, Slingshot sat beside me during dinner. "You're the one I'd want next to me in a nosedive," he said. I didn't answer, but something in my chest loosened. Weeks later, a package arrived from home. Manila folder, my mother's handwriting. Inside was a clipped article, my father's latest op-ed. Halfway through, he quoted an unnamed pilot: "Flight doesn't belong to arrogance. It belongs to those who survive crosswinds." I read it 5 times. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. I emailed him one line: "We survived the crosswinds, still flying." He didn't reply. Months stacked into deployments. My name appeared on lists again and again. Inside the squadron, I became the quiet constant. Not the loudest, not the flashiest, the one who didn't rattle. Outside it, I was mostly invisible. At a strategy conference, I overheard 2 senior officers near the coffee station. "Echo's solid," one said. "Too quiet," the other replied. "Her dad would have eaten her alive." I grabbed my coffee and said, without looking back, he tried. The sea respects only the landing. I learned that truth the hard way off the coast of Guam. Night cycle, weather turning, wind, cross-current, rain on the horizon. Command offered to delay. I said no. I don't know if it was pride or principle, maybe both. The launch was smooth. The flight was routine until fog rolled in harder than forecast. Visibility dropped fast. By the time I approached the carrier, I couldn't see the deck, just light and glare. First pass too high, waved off. Second pass almost caught the wire but bounced. Waved off again. On the third, I was low. My stomach rose into my throat. Then the voice in my headset changed. Older, calm, echo. "Pull up, take the reset. This isn't worth your name." I knew that voice, Admiral Singh. I pulled up. Reset the circuit. breathed. The fourth attempt was clean. I caught the wire and stopped dead. The deck crew applauded. I didn't hear them. I sat in the cockpit, shaking, visor fogging. The next morning, a note waited in my locker. Plain white card, no envelope. The sky owes you nothing. You still landed. D. I didn't keep it. I didn't throw it away either. That night, something shifted. Not because I nearly failed, but because I realized I didn't want to land just to prove him wrong. I wanted to land because I belonged, because I earned it. The sea didn't care who my father was. Neither did I. After Guam, my name began to circulate in places I wasn't invited into. Not loudly, not publicly. It moved the way tides do, quiet, persistent, reshaping the shoreline without announcing itself. I noticed it in small things. A seat left open beside me in the ready room, not out of politeness but expectation. A junior pilot waiting until everyone else had left before asking, "Can you look at my tape?" I said yes every time. I shifted without meaning to. Less proving, more preparing. I started showing the younger pilots how to breathe on final approach, how to let the aircraft do what it was built to do instead of wrestling it. I didn't give speeches. I gave margins, small corrections, calm words at the right second. They listened, not because I was loud, because I was steady. A year into that rhythm, a memo landed in my inbox. Pre-deployment readiness protocols needed revision. New threats, new aircraft, new pilots who had grown up on screens instead of steel. The command wanted someone to design a program that emphasized instinct under pressure. My call sign was typed neatly at the top of the draft. Echo. I stared at it for a long time, then I accepted. The work suited me. Long hours, precise language, simulations that stripped comfort away and left only decisions. When the first training cycle ended, the mishap rate dropped. The chatter in the halls changed. Someone scribbled in Sharpie on the whiteboard outside the briefing room, "Echo Doctrine." I erased it the next morning, but the name stuck anyway. At home, silence. My mother sent occasional messages, weather updates, reminders to eat a photograph of the dog getting older. Once she wrote, "He asks about your flights sometimes. Pretends not to care." I didn't reply. Some things weren't meant to be corrected. The call came on an afternoon that smelled like hydraulic fluid and rain. Report to Command Intelligence. No explanation. When I walked into the briefing room, the binder on the table caught my eye before anything else. Project Falcon X. Clean cover, no markings. It wasn't just a new aircraft. It was a statement. 5th-generation stealth strike, autonomous support systems, sensors that could see through weather and intention. 10 years of development, $12 billion, and they needed one pilot to qualify it for carrier landings. 1. A sticky note clung to the inside cover. Candidate Major M. Singh. I looked up. Why me? The officer shrugged. You've got quiet hands? You don't rattle. That night, I sat on my bunk and stared at the hangar lights reflected on polished steel. I took the compass from under my collar and held it in my palm. My father used to say precision wasn't emotional. The sky didn't care about fairness, only results. Maybe he was right. But this wasn't just a plane. It was a promise. The Falcon X didn't take off so much as disappear. The controls felt lighter than thought, like the aircraft anticipated intention. On my first test flight over the Nevada desert, the horizon bent and returned without drama. When I landed, the engineering team clapped. The program lead, a retired commander with a titanium hip and no patience for praise, nodded once. "She can fly," he said. That was enough. The tests stacked. Rain, wind, blackout refueling, simulated EMP. The Falcon X passed. I passed with it. Clearance came with conditions most generals didn't get. Still no press, no announcements. Credit waited. 3 months later, I briefed top command at Pearl Harbor. Halfway through the presentation, I felt it before I saw it. That familiar pressure. I looked up. My father stood at the end of the table, silver hair, neat blazer, crisp like he still owned the ocean. He didn't look at me, not at first. When I referenced inverted recovery metrics, his head tilted. His eyes narrowed. After the session in the hallway, I heard him behind me. She couldn't possibly understand those specs, he said to another officer. Someone's feeding her notes. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. 2 weeks later, my call sign appeared on a locked rotation list for a high-profile demonstration. Carrier landing, public, off the coast of San Diego. The pilot's name wouldn't be released until the moment came. Someone at the Pentagon made sure he knew. A sealed envelope arrived at my quarters. Navy crest, embossed card, venue USS Antares, Mission Falcon X final carrier certification, observer Ret ADMD Singh. I stared at it until the edges blurred. Part of me wished it didn't have to be like this, but the sea doesn't negotiate. The night before the flight, the ready room was empty. I pulled a photograph from my pocket, creased old. Me at 6, sitting on his lap in a museum beside a retired F-14. I was pointing up. He was smiling. Back then he used to say, "The sky favors the prepared." I folded the photo and put it away. Morning came heavy with fog. The transport chopper set down on the Antares rotors, slicing mist. Admirals, diplomats, senators, foreign liaisons. They gathered on the observation platform to see if the Navy's newest marvel could land on 300 feet of moving steel at 150 knots. And standing in the shadows, hands clasped behind his back, was my father. I walked to the Falcon X as the crew swarmed it for final checks. No insignia beyond rank. Compass under my collar. When I climbed into the cockpit, the canopy sealed the world into sound and breath. Major Singh cleared for launch. The catapult fired. The sea fell away. The sky opened, waiting to be cracked. The first pass was for show, a low, fast flyby that let the crowd see the aircraft's clean profile. Controlled aggression. On the second, I climbed and circled wide. The deck shrank below me, a restless postage stamp. Wind shifted. I adjusted. Breathing slowed. Final approach confirmed, Tower said. A pause. Then Major Singh, "This is your deck." The second stretched. Velocity perfect. Wire in sight. I breathed once. The wheels met steel. The hook caught the third cable. The Falcon X shuddered and stopped in under 3 seconds. Precision. The loudspeaker cut through the ship. Carrier certification successful. Major Singh, fastest Falcon X qualification on record. Applause rose, surprised and sharp. I stayed still for 5 seconds, visor down, heart steady. When I climbed out, sunlight cut through the fog. Deck crew parted without being asked. I walked across steel helmet under my arm. On the platform, my father stood frozen. His certainty, so carefully constructed, fractured. He didn't clap, he didn't move. He just stared, stunned, as the future landed clean without his permission. After the applause faded and the deck returned to its measured chaos, I retreated into the quietest place I could find, the small viewing chamber off the officers' lounge. Tinted glass looked out over the runway I had just claimed. Inside, the light was dim, the air cool, the smell a mix of coffee and cold steel. I set my helmet on the table and sat, hands resting on my thighs, waiting for the shaking to stop. It didn't come from exertion, it came from release. For years I had carried a tightness I didn't know how to name. It lived in the way I squared my shoulders before entering rooms, in the way I measured words twice before speaking, in the way I flew clean, restrained, exact, never flashy enough to invite scrutiny. I told myself it was professionalism. It was also protection. Footsteps approached. Slow, familiar. I didn't turn right away. I watched my reflection in the glass instead, flight suit creased at the elbows, hair pulled tight, eyes steady but older than I remembered. When I finally faced him, he was standing a few feet away, hands at his sides, not folded. That alone felt like a concession. "You didn't flinch," he said. It wasn't praise, it wasn't criticism, it was observation. "No," I replied, "I learned not to." He nodded once, as if filing the data away. We stood there in silence long enough for it to become a choice rather than an absence. Outside, crew moved equipment. Inside, something waited. "I told them it wasn't built for you," he said finally, eyes still on the runway. "I thought if I made it sound impossible, you'd choose safer skies." I let the words land. "You thought fear would keep me home." "I thought it would keep you alive." I turned fully toward him then. "You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself." He blinked. The line had landed clean. "I've watched pilots die," he said quietly. "I've signed letters to families. I didn't want to imagine your name on one of them." "I didn't ask you to imagine it," I said. "I asked you to see me." He swallowed. For a moment, the Admiral, the certainty, the doctrine slipped. What stood there instead was an aging man who had spent a lifetime believing control could outrun loss. I didn't know how he admitted. Every time you climbed higher, I felt smaller, ashamed of it. I took a breath. The room smelled faintly of jet fuel carried in on my suit. "You don't owe me a perfect past," I said. "Just an honest present." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it right away. He held it, thumb tracing the edge like he was testing the weight of what it contained. "These don't belong in a drawer anymore," he said, and opened the lid. Inside were his command wings, silver, worn smooth by time and touch. I'd seen them once before, years ago, mounted in a shadow box on his study wall. He held them out to me, hands steady. I hesitated, not because I didn't want them, but because I understood what they cost. When I took them, the metal was cool against my palm. He didn't smile, neither did I. We didn't need to. Later, as the ship settled into evening and the crowd thinned, I walked back onto the flight deck alone. The sun dipped low, painting the sea in copper and blue. The arrestor cables gleamed patient and indifferent. I stood at the edge and let the wind move through me. I heard footsteps again. This time I didn't turn right away. "Was it worth it?" he asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation, "even when it wasn't." He nodded slowly. "I tried to make you quit." "I know. I thought I was protecting you." "You weren't," I said gently. "You were protecting yourself." He laughed, then, not bitter, not loud, tired, real. I deserved that. We stood side by side, not close, not far. The wind did most of the talking. After a long moment, he reached into his pocket again and pulled out something small and worn. "I found this last month," he said. "It's yours." It was the photograph the museum, the retired F-14 me on his lap, pointing up. The same photo I had kept folded in my locker for years. I held it like a relic. "You kept this?" I asked. "Every desk I ever had," he said. I didn't know how to say the things that mattered. Silence was easier. "It hurt," I said. "I know." I looked out at the sea. "You don't have to be loud now. Just be honest." He nodded. "Then let me start here. You didn't crash and burn. You touched down when it mattered." The words settled between us, clean, earned. That night back in my quarters, I placed his wings beside my compass on the table. Legacy and direction, both earned, both mine now. The next morning I returned to work. No ceremony, no speeches, but people moved differently around me. Not because of who my father was, because of who I had become. Weeks later, a short clip of the Falcon X landing appeared online. No pilot named. The internet found it anyway. "That's Echo. That's Singh's daughter. She nailed it." Someone titled the video, "Precision Has a Name." I watched it once and closed the tab. A letter arrived soon after, my mother's handwriting steady on the envelope. Inside a gala program and a note: "Your father has requested you present this year's Rising Pilot Award. He says no one else knows how to recognize the quiet ones." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Tell him I'll be there." Because the hardest landing wasn't behind me. It had simply taught me how to stay upright when the deck moved beneath my feet. The weeks after the demonstration passed without ceremony, but not without consequence. Recognition didn't arrive in headlines or medals. It arrived in posture, in pauses, in the way rooms adjusted themselves when I entered, not out of deference to a name, but out of expectation. People expected clarity from me now. At the next squadron briefing, the room was louder than usual, jokes bouncing, chairs scraping. But when the flight lead asked for input on night cycle adjustments, the noise softened without anyone asking it to. I spoke only when I had something to add. I always had something to add. The Falcon X telemetry sat open on the screen, lines of data translating into instinctive truth. Numbers didn't flatter, they testified. "Your final vector correction," one of the engineers said, pointing at the replay that wasn't in the automated sequence. "No," I replied. "The wind shifted. The system compensated late. I compensated early." He nodded slowly. "Only a human would have done that." That sentence followed me longer than any praise ever had. The Navy released a sanitized clip of the landing, no faces, no commentary beyond performance metrics. Still it spread. Forums dissected angles and throttle control. Retired pilots weighed in with grudging admiration. Somewhere in the noise, my call sign surfaced again and again. Echo, not shouted, repeated. At home, my mother called more often. She didn't ask about the flight. She asked about me, how I was sleeping, whether I was eating enough. Once she said he watched the clip 3 times. He didn't say anything. He made tea. I smiled at that. It felt like progress. The gala invitation sat on my counter for days. Naval Aviators Legacy Night. Rising Pilot Award. My father's request was written plainly without flourish. I imagined him standing at a podium, uncomfortable in the spotlight he once commanded, so easily asking me to speak about the next generation. Quiet ones. The thought unsettled me more than any flight ever had. When the night came, the ballroom was warm with polished wood and low conversation. Dress blues replaced flight suits. I scanned the room instinctively the way I always did, exit sightlines posture. My father stood near the back, hands clasped, listening rather than speaking. When our eyes met, he nodded once. Not permission, acknowledgement. I took the stage when my name was called. The microphone hummed softly. I looked out at faces, young pilots with ambition, still sharp older ones with memories etched deep. I spoke plainly. This award isn't about being fearless, I said. It's about being steady. About doing the work when no one's watching. About landing clean when the deck is moving and the wind doesn't care who you are. I didn't look at him while I spoke. I didn't need to. When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous. It was sustained, respectful, enough. Afterward, he approached me slowly, as if the years between us were still recalibrating. You spoke well, he said. So did you, I replied. He looked surprised, then thoughtful. I learned from you. That was new. Later that night, we stood near a window overlooking the harbor. Boats drifted in quiet lines of light. He held a glass he never drank from. I spent my life believing authority came from certainty, he said. From being the loudest voice in the room. And now I see it also comes from restraint. I nodded. Restraint keeps you alive. He smiled at that, a real one, brief, earned. The next morning I was back in uniform, back in motion. The Falcon X program continued. New pilots rotated in for familiarization. I watched them the way my instructors once watched me, waiting for the moment when nerves would surface. When it did, I stepped in. Fly the numbers, I told them, then let go. They listened. One afternoon, as I reviewed logs in the ready room, a junior aviator hovered near the doorway, shifting his weight. Ma'am, he said finally, that landing, how did you not freeze? I closed the file. I did, I said, just not where it showed. He frowned, then nodded slowly, understanding enough. As the sun dipped low over the Pacific, I walked the deck alone. The Antares hummed beneath my boots, constant and indifferent. I touched the compass under my collar. The needle pointed forward, steady. For the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't outrunning a prediction. I was exactly where I was meant to be, earned, not granted. And somewhere behind me, a man who once believed I would crash and burn was learning how to watch without trying to control the descent. The morning after the gala, I woke before the alarm. The room was still the kind of quiet that settles only when a ship knows it's heading. I lay there for a moment, hands folded on my chest, feeling the slow return of ordinary breath. The wings rested on the desk where I'd left them, silver, catching the first light. The compass lay beside them, needle steady. Legacy and direction. Not fused, not competing, aligned. Work resumed the way it always does, without waiting for feelings to catch up. Schedules posted, briefings started on time, coffee burned. I walked the hangar floor and nodded to faces that now nodded back without hesitation. Not awe, recognition. The difference mattered. I spent the morning with a new class cycling through Falcon X sims. One pilot flinched on final approach, a subtle hitch in the wrist that told me everything. I paused the feed and pointed to the data line. See that, I said. You're trying to fix tomorrow's problem today. Fly what's in front of you. He swallowed, nodded, reset. The next run was cleaner. When the sim ended, he looked relieved and a little embarrassed. Thank you, ma'am, he said. Don't thank me, I replied. Thank the work. At lunch, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. He's asking if you want to come by this weekend. No pressure. I stared at the words longer than I needed to. Then I typed back, I can stop in Sunday. She responded with a heart. Small symbols can carry a lot of weight. Sunday came with clear skies and a light wind. I drove up the familiar road, noticing details I'd once avoided, the way the trees leaned the flag by the porch that never touched the ground. He opened the door before I knocked. No uniform, no medals, just a sweater and a tired smile. Coffee, he asked. Yes, I said. We sat at the kitchen table where arguments used to land harder than plates. He poured carefully, hand steady. For a while we talked about nothing that mattered: weather, traffic, the neighbor's new fence. Then he set his cup down and folded his hands. I used to think strength meant never changing your mind, he said. I was wrong. I didn't rush to fill the space. Silence had taught me its value. I watched you fly, he continued. Not just that day. I've been watching for years. I just didn't know how to admit what it meant. What did it mean, I asked. That you were better than my fear, he said. And that frightened me. I nodded. Fear makes us say things we can't take back. I know, he said quietly. I said you'd crash and burn. I believed it would keep you close. It didn't, I said, but it taught me something. He looked up. What? How to land anyway. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. He reached across the table and rested his hand near mine, close enough to be intentional. That was new. That was enough. When I left, the sky felt wide in a way it hadn't before. Not empty. Open. Back on the Antares. Later that week, I stood on the observation deck alone, watching the ocean work. The arrestor cables gleamed. The deck crew moved with the same quiet competence I'd come to trust. I breathed in salt and fuel and memory. There's a saying among carrier pilots that the sea only respects the landing. It doesn't care about your name, your pedigree, your predictions. It doesn't clap for intentions. It waits. And when you touch down clean, it lets you stay. I learned something else too. Families are like flight decks. They move. They shift. They test you in ways weather never will. You can wave off forever, or you can commit knowing the wire might bite and the steel won't bend for you. Either way, you have to fly the approach yourself. Weeks later, a young pilot found me on the deck as the sun fell. He hesitated, then spoke. My dad says I'm chasing the wrong thing, he said, that I should choose something safer. I watched the horizon for a moment. What do you want, I asked. To fly, he said, but I don't want to lose him. You might not, I said, and you might. Either way, don't lose yourself trying to keep the peace. He nodded, absorbing it. Then he squared his shoulders and walked back toward the ready room lighter than he'd arrived. That night I placed the wings back in the box and slid it into the drawer, not hidden, not displayed. The compass stayed where it always had, against my skin. The needle pointed forward, but it no longer felt like a chase. It felt like a choice. I don't know what comes next. Command, teaching, writing the manuals no one reads until they're in trouble. I know this. I was told I'd crash and burn. I was told I didn't belong. I was told silence meant weakness. They were wrong. I landed because I prepared. I stayed because I earned it. And I learned that pride doesn't have to be loud to be real, and love doesn't have to be perfect to be honest. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a landing you made without applause or a silence you carried longer than you should, I'd like to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from, or share the moment that taught you how to stay steady when the deck moved beneath your feet. We tell these stories for the quiet ones, the ones who keep flying anyway. Subscribe if you'd like to continue the journey with us. We're here every day, and there's more ahead.